Okay, in Chapter 3 we're going to be studying the different cells of the body and what they do in order to keep the body healthy and working correctly. So when we talk about the human body, it is actually composed of over 200 different kinds of cells. You have 100 trillion cells that make up your body, but there's over 200 different kinds, from liver cells to skin cells to cardiac cells. Okay, all the cells in your body have the same basic structures, that is with the exception of your red blood cells, which do not have a nucleus. Everything else does. But the different cells of your body are going to perform different jobs, but all of them have to be able to make proteins. That is the key component, key thing that all cells have to be able to do. So when we talk about cells, there's some basic cell structures that you need to know. So most cells have these certain things in common. All cells have a cell membrane. So that is a semi-permeable barrier that provides support and protection for the cell. It goes around the whole outside of the cell. Also, a lot of the cell parts inside of the cell are made up of cell membranes, and these are also called plasma membranes. Cytoplasm is the watery material that's inside of the cell. It's basically all of the different organelles that are in the cell except for the nucleus. And what's most important about the cytoplasm is this is where most of the key chemical reactions that happen for your body, they're actually going to take place in the cytoplasm of your cells. Now the cell parts, there's different kinds of cell parts that are found in cells. There's non-cytoplasmic structures, so that could be cell wall, the nucleus, cytoskeleton, cell membrane are all non-cytoplasmic cell structures. The only one that humans do not have in their cells is a cell wall. We do not have cell walls. That's only in plants, fungus, bacteria, some protists, but animal cells do not have cell walls. Your cytoplasmic organelles, there's a whole list of them here, and they all are going to play very different roles, but many of them are going to be involved in making proteins, and others are going to be involved in getting energy. So an organelle is basically the little organs of the cells. So all of those little cytoplasmic parts that we just talked about, those are all organelles, and they all are going to perform specific functions within the cell. So we have cell parts that are going to act as boundaries. So your cell membrane is the main boundary for all cells, made up of phospholipid bilayer, and as I said before, it's selectively permeable, which means some things are going to be able to get in and some things won't. We'll talk about that later on. And then you also can have a cell wall, but again, cell walls are not found in humans or any animals, but here's a plant cell with a cell wall going around the outside. Okay, your controls, everything needs to be controlled, so you have your nucleus, chromosomes, and nucleolus, and these are going to be the control portion of the cell. The nucleus contains the chromosomes. The nucleolus is going to make your ribosomes, and your ribosomes are going to be really important when it comes time to make your proteins. So right in the center of the cell, you have the things that are going to be controlling all the other parts of the cell. All right, so the assembly of proteins, this is a key thing in order for your cells to work correctly. You need to be able to make proteins. Three main parts that are involved in this is the actual making of the proteins. You have ribosomes, and their job is to actually put the amino acids together that make up a protein. This happens very often in the cytoplasm, or these ribosomes may be attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So here you can see your ribosomes. Here's your rough ER, they're attached to it. And basically the directions on what proteins that need to be made are going to come from the DNA. Those directions are going to go to the ribosomes, and the ribosomes are going to put the proteins together that you need. Okay. Now, once those proteins get made, they need to be transported to the correct places. So there's more endoplasmic reticulum that's going to be involved with that. You also have the Golgi apparatus, which looks like this kind of weird-looking stack of membranes. And then the Golgi apparatus actually makes these things called vesicles, and they're little like taxi cabs that bring stuff all around the cell and over to the side of the cell. Okay. Storage. We need to be able to store things inside of our cells. So some of our cells have vacuoles, which are just going to store food, water, whatever we might need. In plants, they have a very large vacuole in the center because they have to be able to store a lot of water in order to do photosynthesis. Our vacuoles tend to be much smaller. We also have lysosomes. Lysosomes are special because they contain inside of them enzymes, and those enzymes are actually going to be used to break down food as well as things that come into our cells that don't belong. So the lysosomes will, can go over and they can actually fuse with bacteria or viruses that get into the cell and destroy them before they can make the cell sick. So sometimes we have that extra added defense inside of our cells. Okay, our energy transformers, very important. Chloroplasts, again, only found in plant and protist. They're going to be doing the process of photosynthesis. Okay, we can't do that. That's making food using sunlight. So, we're not green and we can't just lay out in the sun and get the energy that we need. It doesn't work like that. But we have mitochondria, which are going to allow us to get our food, and the mitochondria are going to do cellular respiration. And that is the main way that we are going to be able to get energy from our food. So we're going to break down a glucose molecule, and when we do that, we are going to get 36 ATP for every glucose molecule. And the fact that we have our mitochondria allows us to do that. Some cells, like muscle cells and nerve cells, have a lot more mitochondria because they need a lot more energy in order to do their job. All right, we have a support system inside of our cells. We don't have cell walls, so instead we have a cytoskeleton. So that means the skeleton of the cell. It's a crisscrossing network of proteins that are all throughout the cell, and it helps to give the cell its structure so it doesn't just collapse in on itself. It keeps it kind of have that three-dimensional look to it. Okay. Movement. We have cells that need to be able to move on their own, and we also have cells that need to be able to move stuff past them. So cilia can be used by our cells, like our respiratory cells. So in your nose and stuff, you have all these tiny little hair-like structures that come off of your respiratory cells, and as you breathe, they are going to trap dust and push that stuff back out, and so every once in a while you'll sneeze to get rid of those things. A flagellum is something like what's found at the end of a sperm. It's a long tail that you would find at the end of a cell, and it would actually allow that cell to swim really fast. So these are both going to be used for movement. And then we also have special cell structure that is for cell division. In our cells, they're called centrioles, and plant cells are called centrosomes. But basically, they're going to be involved in the process of mitosis and meiosis. So mitosis, we're going to make copies of our cells. In meiosis is how we're going to make our sex cells. And that's going to come up when we talk about the life cycle. Okay, so here is just a graphic of all those different cell parts. So you can just see the nucleus is in the center, the nucleolus, which again is making the ribosomes. You have your rough ER going around the outside. Smooth ER is also part of this, which is going to make different lipids. Scattered throughout here, you have your mitochondria, which are going to be breaking down or getting our energy for our cell, producing our ATP. We have some vacuoles in here. Here's our centrioles. You can see these lines going throughout. Those are the cytoskeleton lines. Here's our Golgi apparatus. So there's all sorts of things that are happening on the cell at all the different times. And all of these different parts are going to be working together to keep your body healthy. Now, sometimes your cells need to be able to get things in and out. You need to get oxygen in, you need to get food in, you need to get waste products out. So moving things through the cell membrane. The main ways that we are going to move things in and out of the cell is through diffusion. Okay, so remember, molecules move spontaneously. They don't need energy, they're in constant motion, and they are always looking for as much room as possible to move. So they move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So if you put a sugar cube into a beaker of water, okay, the sugar starts out all together, and it will eventually disperse until it's equally spread out in that beaker of water. That's what diffusion is. The molecules want as much room as possible to move. They're still moving even when they're at this point, but they're spread out so they can move as much as they possibly can. Now, sometimes when we're going through the cell membrane, the molecules will need help, and so that we call facilitated diffusion. To facilitate something means to help it. So this means that we're going to use special proteins that go through the cell membrane, and that's going to help transport things in and out of the cell. So here is a molecule that's going to go into the cell, but it's got to get in there through these special proteins because it cannot get through the membrane itself. So that's facilitated diffusion. A very special kind of diffusion that happens that's really important to humans is osmosis. That is diffusion of water through our membrane. Okay, and osmotic pressure is the pressure to stop osmosis. So when your kidneys start to, you've been drinking a lot of water and you haven't gone to the bathroom for a while, you can make that process kind of, the osmosis process is what's allowing you to make your urine. And if you can't go to the bathroom and you need to stop making urine, osmotic pressure will help your body to stop making urine. Basically, it's the same idea. Water is going to move to where there's less. So if there's a lot of more water over here than there is over here, as you can see by the blue, the water is going to move in that direction through the membrane. Okay, filtration we'll be talking about more when we get to the urinary system, but this is basically where molecules get forced through a membrane through pressure, and this mainly happens in your kidneys, and this is going to happen through a whole network of tubules and capillaries that are in all throughout your kidneys. There's millions and millions of these little units called nephrons. They're found everywhere, and that is the main way that you're going to be cleaning your blood. All right, now sometimes we have to move molecules against the concentration gradient, and so when we have to do that, that is going to require energy. Okay. Also, it usually is going to involve a carrier molecule. Okay. So you're going to have energy involved, and you can very often have a carrier molecule like a protein or something. So the main ways active transport can occur. This again, we're going from low concentration to high, not what the molecules want to do, but sometimes we need them to do that. The sodium-potassium pump is a great example. This is what we're going to use to make our nerves, our neurons impulses go. And we need to be able to switch sodium and potassium for each other, even though they don't want to do that, so it requires energy. Also, sometimes we need to transport particles out of the cells. We need to spit stuff out. That's exocytosis. So here's a large amount of stuff that the cell made, and we need to release it all very quickly. That can happen with insulin, is an example where we would use exocytosis to get rid of a bunch of stuff. Endocytosis is where we're taking stuff into the cell. So here is a molecule of something that's come along and it's going to get engulfed into the cell. Our white blood cells will do this to bacteria, take them in, and then they will fuse with lysosomes and will destroy those things. So there's two different kinds of endocytosis. Pinocytosis is when we're taking in liquids, and phagocytosis is taking in solids. And that would be like the example of the white blood cells taking in a bacteria to get broken down. All right, the last thing we're going to look at here is basically what the human life cycle is. So we all have a life cycle from the time of conception to when we may have our own children to the time of death, and these are the things that are going to happen during that time. So meiosis is where gametes are going to form. So gametes are your sex cells. Okay, so when we're talking about gametes, we're talking about your sperm and egg. So, for boys it's sperm, for girls it's egg. So at some point after puberty, you will start making your sperm and eggs. And once that happens, you are now hopefully capable of reproduction. Now, for some people, it doesn't always work out, but for most people, they're able to reproduce once they've been able to make their gametes. So once the gametes are made and a sperm and egg come together from two different individuals, fertilization will occur. And when fertilization occurs, you get something called a zygote. The zygote is the fertilized egg. And that is what is going to develop into your new person. The way that happens is through mitosis. So the zygote is going to divide many, 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 many times over and over and over and over and over again, going from one cell until you are made up of trillions of cells. And then what is going to happen is mitosis, you make copies. And once you get past a certain point in development, those cells will begin to differentiate. And that means they're going to become specialized. So remember in the very first slide, I said that there's over 200 different kinds of cells that make up the human body. During differentiation, that's when these cells become specialized. They develop the characteristics that you need them to have to do certain jobs in the different parts of your body. And then once differentiation happens, then the individual will develop fully, grow, and then they can start their own human life cycle if they choose, where they would go meiosis, make their sperm and egg, go through fertilization, and go through this whole process again. So that is basically a look at all of our cell processes in a nutshell.